Our final speaker today is Colonel Dennis Armstrong. Dennis is currently at the Distance Learning Department in the Air War College. He was commissioned in May of 1985 from the United States Air Force Academy. He's a graduated squadron commander, command pilot with over 5,000 hours in the T-37, C-5, KC-10, C-37 aircrafts in supporting efforts in Desert Shield and Storm, Somalia, Haiti, Southern Watch, Bosnia, and Kosovo. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my good friend, Dennis Armstrong.
Thank you. Take your seats, please. Good morning. Today we're going to cover, you have covered in the previous briefings, I'm going to cover a lecture, and then you're going to have a seminar about a very serious topic, one in which I hope none of you actually need. But given the statistics, 85% of you going on to command, given that we're a nation at war, it's guaranteed there are going to be some of you out there in the audience that need this while you're a commander. Additionally, those of you who have the good fortune not to have somebody die in your unit probably will have a sister squadron that goes through this, and you can help them out as well. So my purpose here, what I've been tasked to do, is provide a commander's perspective. And that's what I'll attempt to do. In doing that, there's one thing I need to note up front, and that's no two situations are the same as far as a death. It could be combat related, it could be peacetime, it could be off duty, it could be mission related, it could be suicide. There's a full spectrum of different types of situations that you're going to be in. So no one situation is going to give you everything. What I will attempt to do today is find those commonalities. I'll take you through what happened to me in a chronological pattern so you can get kind of a sense of the timing, but also an idea of the spectrum of issues that you will have to work as a commander. So to do that, like I said, they're all different. I do need to caveat a little bit with what was my situation. I was the commander of a geographically separated unit in Belgium. That means everybody at Chevs Air Base, where I was, fell under me, and my boss was at Ramstein. So all our support functions were actually in Germany. And that'll be important later. Also, the two individuals were single, so they did not have family in the immediate area. But given that, let's go ahead and get started here. First thing I need to do is introduce you to Barry and Rick. Now, the lawyers in the audience are probably a little shocked that I'm going to use real names, but this subject, really at its core, is about real people. This is about people that you will know as a commander, and you're going to have to deal with the loss personally. You're also, people in your unit know them, and they're going to have to deal with it. So you've got to deal with it on that perspective. You also have to deal with it as a commander with people in your chain of command and external agencies. And these people don't know them. To most of those people, these are statistics. The reason I bring that up, it will sometimes make you very frustrated if you're going through this process, because you're going to deal with people who can make some pretty callous remarks about it and some speculation as to what happened, because they're just statistics. They don't know them as individuals. So as a commander, you're going to have to deal with both of those. All right, well, what happened? Take a look at this. I think I'll stop right here and give you a little safety message. Look at the tree, missing a little bit of bark. Look at the car, 2 fatalities. Okay? Very, very serious accident, almost no damage to the tree. You guys are going to be, you've got a 3-day weekend coming up at the end of this month. You have PCS next month. You may have a reason to do a long drive. Ultimately, this was the driver fell asleep. This is what can happen. So don't take that lightly. When you go out there, and for your people, make sure you're emphasizing the importance. If you're tired, pull off the side of the road. All right, the preliminary information, and this comes from the preliminary police report that I received the first day, which was driver was not wearing a seatbelt, passenger was wearing a seatbelt, death appeared to be imminent, and it appears that the driver fell asleep. At that point, they didn't feel that alcohol was involved. OSI shared the same view. That'll be important later when I talk about line of duty determination. So that's the background. Okay, you never know the time and the place. In this case, I wasn't even on station. I was in Athens, Greece. Got a call from my first sergeant. We've just had 2 people die. I want to give you just a couple seconds. Think about that. Think about receiving that phone call. Think about what's going to go through your mind, what you want to have as far as a conversation with your first sergeant. What are your priorities at this point? Well, needless to say, about 1 million things were going through my mind at this point. But basically boiled it down within the phone call to a couple things. One, verify that it's actually our guys who died. Last thing you want to do is go notifying people and then find out it wasn't actually those people. Next thing is, if it was our guys, what are we going to do? And we came up with running a recall, bring everybody into the squadron. That gives us a controlled environment to get the word out, to talk to people, to tell them what's going on. The last thing you want, and this happened on a Sunday, last thing you want is for the rumor mill to be how everybody finds out about it. Because then you're going to have 1 million stories on what happened. Okay, you heard the chaplain earlier. Very, very valuable to you as a commander, always, but in particular in a situation like this. We had the chaplain present, and he was busy for a long period afterwards, sitting down with people and talking to them after they found out about it. My ops officer gave them the information, the facts that we knew at that point in time, and emphasized to them, no phone, no email. Why? Because the next of kin, as far as we knew, had not been notified yet. And in fact, we knew at that point they had not. But bottom line is you need to emphasize that to people. It may seem obvious, but you've seen what emails do. Somebody can think they're just emailing their best friend, hey, this happened. And then all of a sudden, that's how people find out somebody died. And that is not the way that people should be notified. All right, so while that was going on, I was working my way back towards Chevs. I got there about 3 in the afternoon. And when I showed up, basically everybody was gone at that point, except my first sergeant and ops officer. They had already gone back. And that's an interesting situation to be in. My whole squadron knows about the death. I have yet to actually be able to look in anybody's eyes other than the ops officer and the first sergeant. Okay? And I'll talk about that more for the next day, why I did what I did. But at that point, sat down, discussed what had they already done. They called the command post at Ramstein, notified them. It's important. Notify the chain of command, and then you start the OpRep 3 and all that going up. And then casualty assistance, you heard earlier, but this is how the interface is. You call them up, make sure they know so that they can start the chain. It goes, basically, I believe it goes to Randolph, and then from there they identify who is actually going to make contact. In this particular case, and I'll talk more about it later, there were actually 4 people who had to be contacted total for this. And so that's the process there. Initial police report, which essentially is what you saw on the slide with the crash there. And then also we sat down, we talked about, okay, what does this week look like? What are the things that we need to do? We did basically a planning session for how we're going to handle it. After that, they went home. They'd been there for a long time. And I went ahead and started doing some stuff up front that I knew I was going to need to do eventually, which was start the letters and start working on the speech. And so I did that. Next morning, got up bright and early. And actually, before that, I do want to take a break here and talk about some terms. Now, you heard most of these terms, maybe all of them, within the last couple briefings that you've had. I want to just talk to them a little bit from the commander's perspective on them. The next of kin, basically you learn a whole new vocabulary when something like this happens. And these just they just roll off your tongue after a while because you're just using them every day. The mortuary affairs and casualty assistance reps are for the family. That's not anything to do with the squadron itself, but you need to know that they're there and they're interfacing with the family members. The SCO, Summary Courts Officer, that's somebody from your unit, and so is the FLO. And I'll talk some more about those, but basically the Summary Courts Officer handles the stuff, and the Family Liaison Officer handles dealing with the family on a daily basis. Escorts and unit reps. This one I was not aware of until this happened, but the escorts, there's only one escort allowed per body, and that is officially funded by the Air Force, so it's not out of your unit funds. And that one is only if the family requests it. And there are some legal issues when they do, as far as the escort has to, A, accompany the body the whole way there, but B, stay until released by the family. The other one, unit reps, funded out of my unit funds to send and go along with the escort if I choose to do so. I'll talk about that a little bit too. The other one is primary authorized disposition or direct disposition of remains. I believe in the last year, most of you had to fill that out. I had never heard of it prior to this, and this became a legal battle between Rick's parents, who were divorced, over who got to choose where he was actually going to be buried. But that's the importance of the pad. All right, so priorities. What are you going to do? This is, remember, I still at this point haven't even looked eye to eye with people in my squadron about this and talked to them about it. So what I decided to do, starting first thing in the morning, was go visit each of the shops. Now that sounds easy, but the bottom line is I had 19 shops in 11 buildings on 2 different installations. So this process actually took me 4.5 hours. The best use of my 4.5 hours I ever could have had. Okay? It gave me a chance to actually look at people. And I could have brought them in for a commander's call and done that, but they had already gotten the information. I would say when you give out the initial notification, you do need to bring everybody together for that. But since this was day 2, much better use going to the shop where it's less formal. They can ask more questions. I gave them, here's what we know at this point in time, and that was important. What surprised me was all the rumors that were floating around. In 19 different shops, 19 different sets of rumors on, I heard this happened, I heard that happened. Very, very important for me to be able to go there and talk to them, go, no, that's not true, here's what we do know, that type of stuff. So, very important. The other things, I talked to them about dealing with the loss. You got to understand, there are some people who have done it at that point, but with a lot of young airmen and stuff, they haven't necessarily had to deal with this yet. And so I kind of talked about the grieving process, watching out for each other, making sure you talk to each other about it. Don't let somebody just be quiet and hold off by themselves. And the other big thing was to emphasize, at that point, we still hadn't gotten any information to confirm whether the next of kin had been notified yet or not. So they needed to still know, can't make any phone calls or emails about the subject. The Cinco de Mayo lunch, the wives of the unit were planning to put on a fundraiser. This happened the accident happened on the 4th, so this is the 5th of May. They were putting on a fundraiser, and basically in light of this, they decided, well, we're not going to do any fundraising, but we've already bought everything, so let's just have the lunch. It's just one of those things that just happened, but it was a great thing for the unit. It allowed them to get out of those shops and into a social environment. We had the chaplain come as well to that. And it was very therapeutic, if you will, for the unit, because they could come together in a social setting and just talk. So, all right, newspaper. This one kind of blindsided me. As I was off visiting the different shops, I came back and my ops officer notified me that the local paper had an article in it on the accident, including their names and actually photographs from their ID cards of each of them. Again, next of kin haven't been notified yet, but this is in Belgium. Now, it's also a French newspaper and all that. The chances of the next of kin actually getting information that way was pretty slim, but it's still, we're used to in the U.S. having some sort of a blackout on the names until we've actually confirmed they've been notified, but that didn't exist here. The summary courts officer. All right, at this point, who do you pick? For both the flow and the SCO, my advice would be don't pick their best friends for this. You don't have to pick their worst enemies either, but you don't want somebody who is so close to the situation that they're just too caught up in the emotion to be able to do the job well. The other thing I want to say on this, and it goes for not just these 2 jobs, but all the other jobs that you're going to assign people to do, your job as a commander is essentially to set people up for success. And here you're tasking them to do a job they have not actually been trained on. Take the time and sit down and talk to them about what your expectations are, about what they should do. The summary courts officer is actually packing up everything in the desk and everything in the house. That's kind of an emotional thing to go through a dead man's stuff and box it up. He's also going to have to deal with the family and wanted to make sure that before he ever calls them that he's talked to me, he's talked to the flow, so that the unit has the same message going to the family so that we don't get conflicting. Well, I heard that, that type of stuff. So definitely train them. One issue with this, and I just dealt with it straight on. I said, look, single guy, you may find some Playboys or something in there. Now, legally, those Playboys belong to whoever is the legal recipient of his belongings. But again, I think you can apply, pardon me, but the plus model that you learned at the beginning of this, it may be the legal answer, it's not the right answer. And I talked to him about that, so there'd be no question in his mind. If he ran across those types of things, pull them out from everything else. All right, and again, if he needed any help, to come to me. So don't feel like this task is his and he just has to do it and grind through it. Family liaison officer. You want somebody who is sensitive, talkative, can develop a good relationship with people. Again, not a best friend, because you don't want somebody who's too close to it to be able to help the family the way they need to be helped. And again, E7 or above. In this case, I actually had 2 of my master sergeants do it. Biggest thing there, they are going to be the ones who daily make calls to the family to make sure they're doing okay, to help handle things. As the commander, I called them a couple times a week, but I didn't call them every single day. But the thing to stress here is communication. The flows were supposed to come to me after each time they called. Just let me know how it's going with the family. All right, escorts. I kind of talked on this briefly when I talked unit reps, escorts. Obviously, it's 0 or 1 escorts is the right answer, because that's all you can legally send. But you can send unit reps. So how many should you send to go along with a funeral? And my thought on this was it can be pretty intense emotionally to deal with the family and the funeral and all that. And so I wanted to send at least 2 so that there was kind of mutual support. And so that was my take on it. And actually with Rick's family, I'll kind of talk about it a little later, I sent 3. And that's because his parents were divorced and there was bad blood between them and between the mother of his son. So 3 allowed them to 1 to each, and they wouldn't have to have some sort of a squabble about that. All right, at that point I found out that the next of kin had been notified. This is more than 24 hours since the accident, but at least now I knew they had been notified, and so I can take the next step. Because they are not local, basically they have the option of getting a call from the unit. They all wanted a call from the unit for obvious reasons. And one thing, when you are separated from the next of kin, you actually represent a couple things to them. One is a source of knowledge about what happened. Because, as was mentioned earlier, when the person comes to notify them, they only have a small amount of knowledge of what's going on. That's all they can give them. And from that point until they hear from the unit, they're just lacking knowledge and they're hungry for it. They want it. The other thing is that they also see you as a link to their child. Okay? So there's some things to keep in mind. But as you approach this, and again, this was going to be 4 phone calls for me. I approached it with some trepidation. I wasn't sure exactly how they were going to take this, talking to them about their dead son. There were some commonalities. The biggest ones I already talked to you about, but also as I placed each of these calls, I found that basically they talked nonstop for probably 2-3 minutes with a lot of questions being thrown out, but never stopping for me to answer those questions. So I had a pad of paper, wrote down the questions as they mentioned them so that I could then go back later and address each one of those for them. There were a couple other differences between the calls, and I'll just talk about those again, just kind of give you the spectrum of issues, things that you can work, questions you might be asked. First call I made was to Barry's parents. They were still married, so there was only 1 call there. And Barry's father, basically, his biggest thing was, where's my boy? They can't tell me where he is. And so telling him that he's in the morgue, downtown Mons, was actually reassuring to him. And then he wanted to know whether he died instantly, and again, initial indications were that he did. And then he started asking about his friends. Were they doing okay? How were they handling it? Things like that. Rick's mother, very talkative lady, very energetic. talking a million miles an hour, but wanted two specific things. Wanted me to send her the cross that he always wore around his neck and his leather jacket. Now, obviously, danger, don't go down that path. I'm not in a position where I can promise her any of that. That all has to go to whoever his legal heir is. In this case, it was his son, but I said that's, the lawyers will have to determine where those go, and I can't promise you that. Then when I called his father, and this was an interesting case, and you'll see in a couple days when I end up having to call him back. But his biggest thing was he wanted to have a military funeral, and his wife did not. Okay, so I talked about the importance of the pad, and he wanted me to help convince his wife that it should be at a military cemetery. Again, it's you need to talk to Mortuary Affairs. They can explain the differences between the two to you, but I can't enter into that. But he was, throughout the whole conversation, he was very stoic, very unemotional about it. And it seemed a bit odd, but I know that people take it differently. So I didn't really think too much about it then. A couple days later, it was an issue. And then finally, I talked to the mother of Rick's child. He had never been married, but he had a child. And she basically, again, talking quite a bit, but her biggest issue was he drinking? That was the big thing. Was he drinking? Was he drinking? Again, you have to deal in the facts as you know them. Initial indications are alcohol was not involved. That's what the police report says. That's all I knew at that point in time. I didn't have a blood alcohol level. Later on, as I'll explain, there was actually one. But at that point, all I could give her was initial indications. So that's what the conversations were like. Once those were done, my first sergeant on Sunday had already arranged with the chaplain, and again, I can't stress how important the chaplain is, to come and to help plan the memorial service basically Monday night. So he came in, we talked about it. I put this up. Obviously, I'm not going to run through the whole list of things, but as you can see, it's a long list. There's a lot of things to do. So one issue becomes the timing of the event, if you will. That's a lot of stuff to take care of. You can't do it the next day. You also, as the chaplain talked about, it's important to have it, and you don't want to put it off too long. We kind of looked at Thursday, Friday as being our window. We would not want to put it off past the weekend into the next week. But we didn't see how we could possibly do it before Thursday. So we settled on Thursday, and that became our target as we tried to line this up. The other thing I want to say here, this is a long list. A lot of things on that list. Bear in mind, you've got a squadron full of people, all who are going through some form of grieving, but all who really want to do something to help them through that process. And so plenty of volunteers to handle all of these things. It's more a matter of just orchestrating the volunteers because there are a lot of them. They all want to contribute. All right, some other issues. This may or may not be a factor for you, but the loss of just one person, we were geographically separated, men manning in each of those shops. Lots of shops, not many people in them. My communication systems operator, 3 of them, it's a crew position on the airplane. I had to have a 2.0 crew ratio, and now I'm down to 2 CSOs. This was one of those I just gave the ops group, said, I've got to have a replacement as soon as possible, and let them run with it, because I've got a lot of other things to do. But it's something you as a commander have to think about. What is the impact on your unit? Especially if it were a large-scale accident where you're losing even larger numbers, you're going to have to address that somehow. Pulling the serfs. This was my first sergeant's idea. He was an experienced first sergeant. He said, they lock the records after a certain amount of time. We need to pull every record we can out of the system, including a Decor 6, now, and we did. And that way, once they locked the records, it wasn't a problem. We still had all the information we needed. We had the ability to put them in for medals as needed. Body release. This is one, if you're not a geographically separated unit, you probably won't end up having to work, but we had to work it. Biggest issue here was who was going to pay to move the body from Morgan Mons to Landstuhl. Basically, we had to hire a hearse to go do that, and it was a matter of lining up funding, and it was a delay in actually getting the body moved. There's also the legal delays of when the country of Belgium is willing to let the body leave the country, which is a legal issue as well. So just things that we had to work. Safety called. They said, hey, we're coming in tomorrow morning. Now, my initial reaction to this, I was a little irked. It's like, can't you put this off for a day or two? Come on. But they have their requirements for what they're doing, and they did, in fact, come by the next day. So they showed up first thing in the morning, and this young tech sergeant was very excited. This was probably his first actual solo out on his own, away from the base, go and investigate. Lots of enthusiasm, very excited. So I had to sit him down and talk to him and just kind of say, hey, calm down a little bit. I know you're going to do a great job for us, but you've got to realize the people you're talking to are going through a loss right here. You need to tone down the excitement a little. And then the other thing I did was send him to talk to the gendarme and the MPs first before he talked to anybody in the unit, again, just to give him a little more time to get kind of settled into what was going on. As it turns out, I am so glad he did come. Even though I was initially irked, the bottom line is he could devote his time to looking at the 72-hour history, all basically looking in the past, allowing me to focus on the present and the future without having, he would brief me on what's going on, but I didn't have to worry about trying to find that out. He was working that for me. We did end up putting both of them in for achievement medals, which got upgraded to commendation medals. You'll have to make the decision based on the circumstances what you're going to do. Donation of flowers. This was one issue that came up, and my first sergeant actually came up with this idea. A lot of people call and want to donate flowers to the memorial service. Well, we were already planning to have a fair number of flowers at the memorial service. What we did was get their name and number and tell them what we really wanted to do was have them send those flowers to the funeral service so that the family would see how many people cared about these individuals. And that worked out fairly well. The other thing we decided on was videotaping the memorial service. Due to location, we were in Belgium. They're in California, Louisiana, Nebraska. They couldn't make it out for the memorial service, and they were going to have the funeral service the next day. We decided to tape it so that we could send them a copy. And that seemed to work out well, too. So this takes us up to Wednesday. At this point, remember, we had that whole list of things that we needed to work through, and everything has kind of fallen into place here, going fairly well. We did the rehearsal. Took about 3 tries to actually get everything sequenced right. Obviously, you want to do it right. One thing I would point out here, you want to make sure that the chaplain can pronounce the name of the individual, especially if it's an unusual name. The name was Gentilali, and during the actual memorial service, it was Gentle Ali every time, which just kind of grinds a little on the people who knew him. So take the time, make sure the chaplain can say it back to you. All right, lawn mowing. And this was kind of a different one. When we went for the rehearsal, some of the people looked around. They said, the lawn needs mowed here at the chapel. And so they took the lawnmowers from Chevs, brought them down to shape, and mowed the lawn to make it look nice. Again, their contribution. Then they came and told me they wanted to mow the lawns at Chevs, which, again, the lawns actually had contractors who were supposed to come out and mow. And it's like, service is at shape. Why do we need to mow them here? Was my initial reaction. But their idea was we had some people coming from Ramstein who were going to land at Chevs, wanted to make a good impression, so everything looked great for them. And quite honestly, even if they hadn't been coming in, this was a chance for them to do something. And so in that sense, yeah, go ahead, do it. That's how people help work through their grieving, and I had no problem saying, yeah, do it. All right. Now, I alluded to this before. What we had was throughout the day we were getting indications that somebody was calling from the States to various agencies around Europe, identifying themselves as a federal investigator, asking questions about what was going on. So, how do you handle that? I called up his dad, talked to him. The bottom line, through the conversation, what came out is There's various states of grief. One of them is denial. That's the state his dad was actually in. He didn't believe this actually happened. What he felt happened was that his son had basically faked the accident so that he could enter the black world ops. So he had this whole elaborate thing in his mind. So in the conversation, I talked about how their best friend was actually the first person on scene. So distraught at what he saw, he was one of my cops as well. I had to pull him out of duty, basically from that, because it was such a tragic scene. Talked about that some. Talked about the article in the paper with the pictures, and eventually through that conversation, he came to accept that, yes, his son had actually died, and then asked that I would send the newspaper article and the translation, which I, of course, did. I did that. Since I was talking to his dad, I called everybody else, too, just to see how things were going. And it's kind of interesting. Again, I talked about his mother being very talkative. Just relayed story after story of Rick when he was younger. And some of those I actually worked into the speech for the next day. When I was talking to his mother, he mentioned this, and those types of things, those traits that we could still see in him as an adult. Who's your audience for the memorial speech? Think about that. It's not just the unit, okay? It's friends. In this case, because we're videotaping, it's actually his young son who would be able to watch the videotape at some point in the future. It's a whole spectrum of people. Why is that important? Well, the people in the unit have a fairly good idea what that individual actually does, but anybody else, they don't really have a clue. So some of what you need to do is explain what they actually did, the contribution they were making to the Air Force, in this case to SHAPE. So think about that when you work the speech. There's going to be a lot of things you want to say, but you do have to figure out who is that target audience and what are the additional things I need to include to make sure that they understand and can put perspective on this. Okay, Thursday we had the actual memorial service. And this is the picture from it. The display was actually created by one of our firemen who was a self-help guru, if you will. Created it in just, like one day or whatever. Put it together. But the chaplain talked a little bit earlier about the impact this has on a unit. And I can't stress that enough. For any of you that have been through it, you know and understand that. Essentially, the unit kind of goes, I'd say, put in aviation terms, kind of goes into a holding pattern from the point of the accident until the memorial service. And it's not that you're ever going to forget, but you almost can't move ahead until you do this. So the impact is immense. So we had the memorial service, and then after the service, we had some fellowship, some food. Again, one of those social occasions for people to get together and to talk. And it was very uplifting for everybody. Obviously, after something like that, the last thing you're going to do is, all right, everybody back to squadron, got to do our job. Basically, min-manning, people can go home, take some time with their families, that type of stuff. One of the things we did, we had all the flowers anyway, brought them all to the actual accident site, and basically everybody took some flowers and set them down on the grave, kind of a spontaneous type of thing. We hadn't planned it out ahead of time, but decided, yeah, that'd be a good thing to do with the flowers. All right, so Friday comes. At this point, the requirement is to send the letters within 5 days, and these were circumstance letters as opposed to just condolence letters. In other words, I had to explain what was going on because they weren't physically at the same base, so it wasn't a direct contact with me. So circumstance letter, explain what happened, and then also express, of course, condolences. Again, it was kind of a end of a very emotionally draining week. And so one flight basically just had a sports day, that type of stuff. But at this point, the bodies had gotten to Landstuhl. Actually, I believe they arrived either Thursday night or Friday morning. They were able to do the autopsy, and they were going to leave on Saturday. So I called in the unit reps and the escorts and talked to them. Again, you're charging them with a job that they haven't been trained for. It's time to sit and talk to them about what's expected and what they need to do. Obviously, the duties I talked about, for those two individuals who were actually escorts, they had legal requirements they needed to be aware of. Then I also talked to them about some things that maybe they weren't expecting, which is we get used to being in this military environment, and everybody knows a certain level of knowledge. When you exit that environment, in particular, they're going back to the CONUS from Belgium, those people there have no idea about the Air Force, no idea about Belgium. Expect questions about that. Think through that stuff so you don't have to just off the cuff talk about it. But in particular, and this was actually my group commander kind of mentioned this to me, and I passed it along to them. They were going to most likely be asked to speak at the funeral. That is, and again, a lot of these guys were very, very young. They might think they can do it off the cuff. And the reality is, because I was sending, some of them were best friends, and they were going to want to speak, they really needed to write out ahead of time what they were going to talk about so that they didn't get up there and just not be able to do anything. And that really helped them, from what I understand. So think about that speech ahead of time. Think about what you're going to say, those things. Watching out for each other. And again, this is why I sent more than one to begin with. When you guys are done with the funeral, you don't go back to separate hotel rooms and just sit in your room. You go out to dinner together, have some conversations afterwards. It's emotionally draining, and you're there for mutual support. Also make sure that you emphasize, a lot of these people haven't necessarily done a lot of traveling of this type, and they can get locked into thinking, they've got to handle these things. Made sure I stress they have a support network at Chevs. They are to call home, make sure we know what they're doing, and so that we can help them if they have problems with anything. And then finally, send them with a bunch of coins, pins, pictures, things like that. Again, to make what Rick and Barry were doing come more alive. Pictures of the airplane, squadron coins, those types of things that can help them have something to latch onto about their child. All right. First week, very, very intense in terms of the pacing and the amount of stuff that you're doing. But then we go into the next week. There's still a lot to do, but you're starting to pick up some of the normal things as well. But the next week, it was too soon the first week, but after I found out that they had been up all night, I fell asleep driving, I had to have a commander's call and talk about what, basically prior to that point, I had always talked about not drinking and driving at every commander's call. That changed. Now I talk about don't drive while impaired. Impaired can be alcohol. Impaired can be medicine. Impaired can be fatigue. In fact, up for 18 hours, you've got the reflexes that are equivalent to being legally drunk. Okay? All right, the SCO and flow duties then continued on. They worked through those, and the funerals were actually held that second week. Then later in May, Group Commander asked me to come to Ramstein with my first sergeant and brief the squadron commanders and first sergeants on the experience, what we went through, so that they could learn from what we're doing. Which actually, that briefing was the genesis of many of the slides that are actually up here now. All right, so then June came along. There is a requirement whenever there's a death in a MAJCOM for that death to be briefed up the chain of command, either to the MAJCOM commander, as was the case in USAFE while I was there, or at least to the numbered Air Force commander. So basically had to start briefing it up the chain. You remember I talked earlier, real people versus statistics. And my boss had already talked to me, okay, this is going to make you mad because it's like the Spanish Inquisition. They're going to second guess everything that you're doing, and it's just going to make you mad. And it will, guaranteed. Monday morning quarterbacking on everything you're doing. And mine was actually a fairly straightforward case, I would say. It wasn't suicide, so it wasn't like, okay, what indications did you miss that you should have caught? Those types of things. It wasn't a aircraft accident. What should you have done to prevent that? But there's still a fair amount of scrutiny. But some of the things they brought up were almost bizarre. One of them, I was asked basically, why haven't you cut down that tree yet? And it's, okay, you're in Germany. You know how hard it is to cut down a tree in Germany, and you're questioning me about this tree? So we talked about that a little bit. And then the most bizarre thing I was asked in the whole briefing it up the chain, it wasn't even asked, it was a statement. Oh, this is clearly a double suicide. Just blew me away. I was like, what are you basing that on? Well, what are the odds of him actually hitting a tree? Those odds are so minuscule, it had to be done intentionally. So it had to be a suicide. Now, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Unfortunately, I didn't have this picture on me at the time. But this is a picture of the road they had the accident on about a quarter mile from where the accident was. So, not having this, I had to handle it verbally. And it was very, very frustrating on my part. So, you just go through, okay, explain why you think, well, this. Okay, well, why was one wearing a seatbelt and not the other if they both wanted to commit suicide? Well, maybe he was asleep and the other guy just wanted to commit suicide. So he's going to kill his best friend. Well, it was just a ludicrous argument. But it was just one of those that just makes you mad. Again, this has to do with, it's a statistic. People watch CSI. They're sure there's some other explanation for what's going on. It was just, again, one of those things. You've got to be aware there is a purpose to briefing it up the chain. Very valuable purpose, which is to prevent future fatalities. And so they're trying to learn as much as they can when you do that. Nobody up that chain knew these two individuals, so they were statistics. Most of the people still kept empathy towards these were real people, and I don't need to make callous remarks. Some people just couldn't do that. So if you find yourself in that chain as it's being briefed up, think about that as you're asking those questions. All right. So then other things ended up briefing General Martin. That all went fine. The biggest thing there, and he had some words for his medical guy. We still didn't have the blood alcohol levels. This was 6 weeks after the accident. I still to this day have no idea why it took so long, except that it couldn't be a standard blood alcohol level test because the bodies in Belgium, they leave the bodies out for quite a bit of time. Then they were in the morgue in Mons for a long period of time. Then they drove probably in an air-conditioned hearse up to Landstuhl. So it was 5 days later by the time they could do any tests. So it could be that the types of tests they had to do just required that length of time. I don't know. But it was kind of weird 6 weeks later not to have that answer. Anyway, the other thing I did was, again, monthly commander's call. This time, topic was wills. Bring the lawyers in, talk about wills. It's one of those free things for us in the military we can have done and we should have done. Rick's money was going to his son, which meant that Rick's money was going to the mother of Rick's son to use as she felt fit. And actually, one of her comments to the flow, hey, they tell me I'm going to get $250,000. Can I buy a house with that? Just one of those things that just made your stomach almost turn when you heard about it. So, anyway, I can't stress enough. You're going to want to talk to them. Do it before anything happens. Think about this. Where do you want that money to be going? All right. Results finally came back. It was mid-July before we actually officially knew the results. Called another commander's call, talked about the results. Since they're out there, again, information is important. You need to communicate to your people. When you get information, you need to pass that along because the rumor mill will make it much worse than anything you could be telling them. And that also leads to line of duty determination. So, very, very high blood alcohol content. 0.2 for Barry, 0.22 for Rick. Okay? So, Rick's not wearing a seatbelt, driving, and he's drunk. Barry, passenger, wearing a seatbelt, but he is drunk. What are you going to do? Are they in the line of duty or not? Now, there is a regulation on line of duty determination, and if you get in this situation, I would recommend that you actually read through it, kind of get a feel for it. Rick's, I felt, was kind of almost open and shut. I mean, drunk, driving, he just, no seatbelt, not in the line of duty was my take on that. Barry's, he was wearing a seatbelt. I don't know for sure that he got into the car with the intent of them driving. It could have been after they got done with the, whatever they're doing in the bar, they were going to go sleep it off, fell asleep, and then Rick wakes up and decides to drive. I don't know. I felt I had to give him the benefit of the doubt. So I said that Barry was not, that he was in the line of duty. So that was my determination. Went up. The JAG reviews it. JAG disagreed. Said neither one is in the line of duty. So what happens at that point is an investigation happens. They come. They talk. I get to express why I felt it should be ruled the way I said. And ultimately, that's what they determined. So Barry was in the line of duty. Rick was not. And then those went forward. They go up the chain, all the review process. And actually, as bizarre as this sounds, in September, I got a phone call from the casualty assistance rep going, "Sir, can you help me? I still don't have the answer on the line of duty determination." This is September. This is a long time since the accident. And with that, I think I'll break for just a minute and talk about one thing, which is the power that you wield as a squadron commander. Okay? Those of you who have been squadron commanders know what I'm talking about. When you identify yourself as the commander, you're able to get things through, to make things happen more than your average major or lieutenant colonel can do. That special power is put there because we understand it's an imperfect world. Things happen, and the commander, it's his job, using discerning judgment, to wield that power to make the right things happen, to do it well, and make sure that those hiccups in the process get ironed out. So, made some phone calls. Found out it was at Randolph at the legal office for a review, and I don't want to make it sound like they were the holdup. They may have only had it for a couple hours at that point, but that's where it physically was located. So I talked to them. I stressed the importance of needing to expedite this. We needed the answer as soon as possible. They needed to move it along. And the very next day, I got a call from the car thanking me, actually, for that, because all of a sudden he was pulling his hair out, not able to get anything moved, and the next day he had the answer. Okay? Now, Will, I had him on the phone. I said, okay, so Rick wasn't in the line of duty. What impact is that? How does that impact his son's compensation, if you will? And these are the numbers. This is from 2003. So the next slide just has some updated numbers so you can see the figures. Basically, death gratuity still happens, but you lose survivor benefit plan, you lose the VA DIC, and a couple other things in there as well, college tuition. You do get SGLI, which of course is just life insurance that you're paying for, so that kind of makes sense that wouldn't be related specifically to line of duty. But the bottom line in both of these, if you compare them, $250,000 difference over the lifetime of the child, or over the next 20 years, really. That's a big difference. Big difference. Use this slide in my commander's call, talking about line of duty, and you know the right answer, you know the right thing to do. The other thing I guess to point out with this, and actually I'll go to the next slide so you can see, obviously death gratuity is up to $100,000 now. That $400,000 SGLI. You may have some people who opted to save the $29 a month and not get that, in which case these figures would be much, much lower. Okay? And although these look like large amounts of money, when you think of that's what they get, in this case a 3-year-old child until the end of college, that's all the support they're going to get, becomes a much less significant number, I guess I'd say. Anyway, throw those numbers out for you just so you can see them. Again, important to emphasize that your guys need to know and understand this, both from the do they have SGLI or do they have enough insurance? Where do they want that to go? Make sure it goes to the right place. And then, obviously, play it smart when they're out there. Wear their seatbelts. Don't drink and drive. That type of stuff. All right. Basically, I won't say that's the end of it in September, but that was most of the major things. One thing that surprised me is things will come up throughout the rest of your time as a commander. That's just the way it is. There is not an end to it in that sense. But I wanted to cover a few items that I didn't cover earlier, just because I think they are important. That first week, you are saturated with so many things to do. Email, obviously back burner, not even going to worry about it, but the inbox. There are some things, reenlistments, things that are time critical. Make sure you tell your orderly room or whoever, if it is truly time critical, can't be put off till next week, you need to hand it to me, not put it in the inbox, because I'm not even going to bother with the inbox. Money. This issue came up. You saw the memorial display. There was a fabric put on it, and it was, well, where are we going to get the money for the fabric, whatever. There's going to be some expenses along the way, so I just talked to the first sergeant and said, look, be prudent about it, but, if push comes to shove, I'll just cover whatever needs to be covered if we can't find the funds another way. Contacting previous commanders, other people, just something to think about in there. Can't stress this one enough. The review with the beginning and end of the day with the shirt and the DO. Critical. Communication is critical. Talking to your unit, but in particular talking to those individuals. Having more people in your orderly room to help out. I brought basically 2 more sergeants in to help handle things because there's a lot going on. And then finally, take care of yourself. If you're on an exercise routine, stay on it. It helps with the stress. Make sure there's somebody you can talk to. That type of stuff. Maybe the chaplain. And so with that, that's actually my story, my timeline from beginning to end, trying to give you a sense of basically the spectrum of things you're going to deal with, the pacing of the things you're going to deal with, and some of the different weird sorts of things. But it's a very emotional thing for you, for your unit. It is one of those things that out of everything you do as a commander, it will be remembered probably more than anything else you do, how you handle that. So it is a critical time. You need to make sure, and you only get one shot to do it right, and you want to do it right because it is important, both in dealing with family and dealing with the unit. But as I said at the very beginning, I hope that this is stuff you will never need. I'm just realistic enough to know that many of you in here will actually need it. So